This is a true story shared on a werewolf-themed forum in the year 2015. It was a cold afternoon when Harry and I were rummaging through the old attic in his house. We weren't doing anything important, just clearing out some of the boxes left untouched since his father passed away. Harry, always the one to find something odd, pulled out an old leather-bound map that had been tucked away in a corner. "Look at this, Lewis," he said, holding the map up to the dim light. The map was old, probably hundreds of years old. The edges were frayed, and the paper felt thin and fragile. It depicted the town and its surrounding forests, but what caught our eye was a strange house marked on the outskirts of town. It wasn't on any of the modern maps. "What's this?" I asked, pointing at the spot. Harry looked at it closely. "That's where the old Blackwood house used to stand," he said, his voice lowering as he spoke the name. I had heard the name before, of course. The Blackwood house was one of the oldest buildings in the area, and people often spoke of it in hushed tones. The stories varied, but they all had one thing in common. The house was haunted, cursed, and abandoned. It was said that the old man who lived there had gone mad after researching something forbidden in the forests surrounding the house. Some even claimed he became a werewolf. "There's nothing left there now," Harry said, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "But look, this map suggests the house is still marked. I say we check it out." I hesitated. The idea of venturing into the woods and finding that old house felt wrong, like we were tempting fate. But curiosity got the better of me, and after a few moments I agreed. "Let's go tomorrow," I said. "But we don't tell anyone. If we get caught, we'll be the laughingstock of the whole town." Harry grinned, rolling the map back up. "Deal. I'll meet you at the edge of town in the morning." And so the plan was set. Little did we know, this would be the start of something much more unsettling than we could have imagined. The next morning, Harry and I met at the agreed spot just outside of town. It was still early, and the fog had yet to lift from the ground. The air was cool, and the trees were eerily still, like they were waiting for something to happen. I could hear birds in the distance, but the forest around us felt unusually quiet. "Ready for this?" Harry asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. He was always the adventurous one, pushing us into things without thinking too much about the consequences. I nodded, though my heart was racing. Something about the old Blackwood house gave me an uneasy feeling, and as we walked deeper into the woods, that feeling only grew stronger. The path was overgrown, with brambles and roots twisting up through the ground, making it difficult to walk without tripping. We walked for about an hour, talking less and less as the forest seemed to close in around us. Finally, the trees parted, and there it was, the Blackwood house. It stood in a clearing, isolated and decrepit. The house had once been grand, but now it was nothing more than a shadow of its former self. The stone walls were covered in moss, and the windows were boarded up, most of the glass long shattered. The roof sagged in places, and there was a heavy air of neglect about it. The house was almost as if it had been abandoned for centuries, though the map indicated it had only been left untouched for about 50 years. "There it is," Harry whispered, almost reverently. We stood in silence for a moment, taking in the sight of it. The house seemed to exude a sense of foreboding, like it had seen things that should never be seen. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. "Let's go inside," Harry said, his voice low. Without waiting for me to respond, he headed towards the front door. I hesitated, but then followed, my footsteps heavy on the ground. The closer I got to the house, the more uneasy I felt, but there was no turning back now. We were already here. The door creaked loudly as Harry pushed it open, revealing the dark interior. It smelled musty, like old wood and damp earth. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards groaned under our weight as we stepped inside. "Let's see what's left," Harry said, his voice echoing in the silence. We began exploring the main floor, finding nothing but abandoned furniture covered in layers of dust. The place seemed frozen in time. But as we walked through the rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the house itself. It was the silence, the strange way the walls seemed to close in on us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching us. "Let's check upstairs," Harry suggested, leading the way up the creaking staircase. I followed, reluctantly. The upstairs was even more unsettling. The air felt colder here, and the walls were lined with old portraits of people I didn't recognize. Their eyes seemed to follow us as we walked past. We made our way down the hall to a door at the far end. The door was slightly ajar, and a dim light filtered through the crack. Without saying a word, Harry pushed it open. Inside, there was a large, dusty desk covered in papers and old books. The walls were lined with shelves, and a fireplace sat in the center of the room. But what caught my attention was the strange symbol carved into the floor, a circle with intricate markings inside it. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the symbol. Harry knelt down to examine it. "This doesn't look like any normal pattern. It's almost like a sigil?" I wasn't sure what it was, but something about it made my skin crawl. There was a strange energy in the room, like it was pulling at me. I took a step back, but Harry seemed fascinated. "This place is incredible," Harry muttered. "Look at all these books. This guy was obsessed with something. We need to see what he was working on." As Harry rifled through the books on the desk, I noticed something else, an old, leather-bound journal sitting on the shelf. It was worn and fragile, but it looked like it had been used recently. I pulled it down, my hands trembling. This is strange," I said, flipping through the pages. "It's full of notes and drawings. Look at this." I showed Harry a page covered in symbols and descriptions of various creatures. Some of them looked like wolves, but their features were distorted, like they were something more. I felt a cold chill run down my spine as I realized what this was about. "This is the journal of the old man who lived here," I said. "And these aren't just stories. He was studying werewolves." Harry looked up, his expression serious. "You don't think it's true, do you?" "I don't know," I said, my voice shaky. "But something is definitely off about this place." Before Harry could respond, a loud noise echoed from the back of the house. We both froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. It sounded like something or someone had moved. We stood in silence, listening. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood frozen in place, trying to make sense of the strange noise. It wasn't the wind or a creaking floorboard. It was something heavier, more deliberate. The air felt thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. "Did you hear that?" Harry whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah, it came from downstairs." Without another word, we carefully made our way to the edge of the room, our steps cautious and measured. The house was so still that it felt like it was watching us. We slowly descended the staircase, moving quietly as possible, trying to avoid making any sound that might draw attention. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused, my eyes scanning the shadows in the hallway. The air was colder here, and the silence was almost oppressive. We crept forward, our footsteps muffled by the thick carpet on the floor. The noise had stopped, but we weren't alone. I could feel it. Harry motioned for me to follow him as he moved toward the back of the house. We reached the kitchen, but there was no sign of movement. It was empty. Just when I thought we might have imagined it, we heard it again, a soft scraping sound coming from behind the door to the basement. "Let's check it out," Harry said, his voice low. I hesitated. The basement was dark and cold, and I wasn't sure I wanted to go down there. But Harry was already making his way to the door, so I followed, my heart racing. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a set of stairs descending into total darkness. I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me as I peered into the abyss below. "I've got a bad feeling about this," I muttered. Harry didn't respond. He was already halfway down the stairs, and I had no choice but to follow. My hand gripped the railing as I descended into the darkness, the cold air wrapping around me like a cloak. At the bottom of the stairs, we entered a small room. It was bare except for a few broken pieces of furniture and stacks of old, dusty crates. The room smelled musty, like it hadn't been touched in years. But something was different about this place. There was a sense of heaviness in the air, like something was watching us. The walls were covered in strange carvings, similar to the ones we had seen upstairs, symbols that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. "This place gives me the creeps," I whispered, my eyes scanning the room. Suddenly, Harry stepped forward, his eyes fixed on something in the corner. I followed his gaze and saw a large wooden chest half hidden behind an old shelf. "Let's open it," Harry said, his voice full of curiosity. I felt a pang of unease, but I couldn't back out now. We were already in too deep. Together, we moved the shelf aside and lifted the chest's heavy lid. Inside, there were several old books and papers, most of them covered in dust. "What do you think this is?" Harry asked, pulling one of the books out. I took a closer look at the papers. They were handwritten, and the writing was barely legible, as if the ink had faded over time. But one page caught my eye. It was a map showing the area around Blackwood House. And at the center of it was a strange symbol, the same one we had seen in the room upstairs. "This looks like a map of the woods," I said, pointing to the markings. "But what's this symbol? It's the same one as in the house." Harry turned the page over, revealing more writing, this time in a much clearer script. The text described something horrifying. It spoke of rituals, sacrifices, and the transformation of the human body into something else, something monstrous. "I knew it," Harry said, his voice trembling. The old man wasn't just studying werewolves. He was trying to become one. I felt a chill run down my spine. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they were forming was not one I wanted to see. We had stumbled upon something far darker than we had anticipated. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaky. Harry looked at me, his face pale. "We need to get out of here, now." But as we turned to leave, we heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind us. We rushed back up the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the narrow hallways. The old house creaked under our weight, but we didn't stop to look back. The journal, the map, and those strange symbols, they were all too much to ignore. We quickly retreated to the small study, the only room in the house that didn't feel suffocating. Harry slammed the door behind us, and we stood there for a moment, catching our breath. "Do you think it's him?" I asked, my voice shaky. "The old man?" Harry didn't answer right away. He was flipping through the journal we had taken from the chest, his eyes scanning the worn pages quickly. "I think it's him," he said finally. "He's been documenting everything. The rituals, the transformations, it's all here." I leaned over his shoulder, reading the scrawled text. The entries were disturbing, each one more cryptic than the last. It was clear that the man had been obsessed with something. But the more we read, the more it became apparent that he wasn't just researching werewolves. He was experimenting with them. "There's one entry," Harry said, pointing to a passage. "He talks about a ceremony, a way to bind a human soul to the beast. He believes that by invoking a ritual on the full moon, he could transform himself." I felt a shiver crawl down my spine as the words sank in. The old man's obsession with the creature had clearly gone too far. Why would he write all this down? "It's like he knew what was going to happen to him," I muttered, staring at the page in disbelief. Harry flipped to another page. This one was different, darker. "This one's recent," he said, his voice quiet. "The last entry in the journal. It described a ritual involving the use of blood, an ancient incantation, and the moon. The old man had marked the date, just days before we had arrived. It seemed like he had been preparing for something. Or perhaps it had already begun. There's something else," Harry murmured, tracing his finger over another drawing. It was the same symbol from the map we had found earlier. But this time, it wasn't just a symbol. It was connected to a diagram showing the moon's phases, and underneath it, a strange equation with symbols we didn't recognize. "Do you think he actually succeeded?" I asked. "I don't know," Harry replied, his eyes scanning the page. "But I think whatever happened to him, it's not over. Not yet." The words hung in the air like a dark omen. I could feel the weight of it settling over us. We were no longer just investigating an old house. We had uncovered something far more dangerous than we had ever imagined. Suddenly, I heard a noise. A soft scrape against the door. My breath caught in my throat, but when I looked around, everything seemed still. "What was that?" I whispered. Harry tensed, his eyes narrowing. He stood up and quietly approached the door. "Stay back," he whispered, reaching for the handle. He slowly cracked the door open. The hallway was empty. "Nothing," Harry muttered, but I could tell by his face that he wasn't convinced. Something wasn't right. We had to keep moving. This place, this house, it was far more than we could have ever prepared for. And there was no turning back now. The air was heavy with tension as we stood in the study. The door still cracked open. Neither of us dared to move for a few moments, our eyes darting nervously around the room. I could feel the weight of the journal in my hands, as though it were a warning, pushing us towards something we weren't ready to face. "Let's check the house," Harry said finally, breaking the silence. He was still unnerved, but there was a determination in his voice now. "We can't just stay here." I hesitated for a moment, the thought of venturing deeper into the house making me uneasy. But I knew Harry was right. We had come this far. There was no going back. We stepped cautiously into the hallway. The house felt different now, colder. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and the creaking of the floorboards beneath our feet sounded almost like whispers. Every corner we passed seemed to hide something, some secret, some mystery we weren't meant to uncover. We decided to investigate the basement next. The journal had mentioned something about the transformation ritual being tied to a specific place in the house, something about a hidden chamber below the floorboards. The basement door was heavy, groaning as it opened. A chill rushed out, making my skin crawl. The smell of damp earth and mildew hit me instantly, but there was something else too. A strange, metallic tang that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We flicked on our flashlights, the beam cutting through the darkness. The basement was far larger than I had expected. It was almost as if the house had been built around it. An afterthought, a forgotten place. We made our way deeper into the basement, our footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The floor was uneven, and as I walked, I couldn't help but notice strange carvings on the walls, symbols similar to the ones we had seen in the journal. Some were scratched into the stone, while others appeared to have been painted in a dark red substance that looked disturbingly like blood. "Look at this," Harry said, shining his flashlight on a large weathered door at the far end of the basement. It was made of thick wood, reinforced with iron bands. It didn't look like it belonged in a house. It looked like something that had been built specifically to keep people out, or to keep something in. I swallowed hard. "What do you think's behind it?" Harry didn't answer right away. He was too busy examining the door. "I think this is it," he said, his voice low. "This is where the ritual took place." My heart raced in my chest. If the old man had truly performed some kind of transformation ritual here, then whatever was behind that door was far beyond anything we had imagined. I watched Harry as he inspected the lock. "It's old," he muttered, "but not completely sealed. We can open it." I nodded, even though my stomach churned at the thought. Every instinct told me to turn back, but I knew that if we didn't go forward now, we might never get another chance to unravel the mystery of the old man and his dark obsession. "Let's do it," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was talking to Harry or trying to convince myself. Harry pulled a small crowbar from his bag, and with a few careful, deliberate movements, we pried open the lock. The door creaked ominously as it swung open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended even deeper into the earth. The air grew colder still as we stepped down into the dark. I could hear nothing but the sound of our breathing, the faint scrape of our boots on the stone steps. At the bottom of the staircase, we found another door. This one, however, was already ajar. Inside, the room was lit by a dim, flickering light. A strange, unsettling hum filled the space, as though something were alive down there, breathing, waiting. We both stepped inside, our flashlights dancing over the walls, revealing more of the strange symbols, this time etched into the floor as well. The floor was covered in some kind of powder, dark and fine, like ash or crushed bone. In the center of the room stood an altar, a stone slab, worn and stained with what looked like old blood. Around it were various ritual tools, chalices, knives, and something that resembled an animal's skull. I could feel the air around me thickening, pressing in. Something was wrong here. The sense of dread that had been building in me since we'd first stepped into this house was now almost unbearable. "What did he do here?" I whispered, more to myself than to Harry. Harry didn't answer at first. He was staring at something on the far wall, something that looked like a mirror. It was strange, shiny, metallic, almost out of place in a room like this. And yet it seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, reflecting only the shadows around it. And then the hum grew louder. It reverberated through the room, sending a jolt of fear through my body. "Louis, we need to get out of here," Harry said, his voice trembling. But it was too late. The door behind us slammed shut, and the mirror on the wall began to glow. A low growl echoed through the room, and I froze, my heart racing as I turned toward Harry. "Harry, what is that?" I whispered, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the mirror, and his eyes were wide with terror. Harry's face was pale as he stared at the mirror, his breath shallow and uneven. The hum in the room grew louder, almost deafening now. I felt a chill creeping up my spine as I followed his gaze. The reflection in the mirror was wrong. At first, it appeared to be just our own reflections, dimly lit by the flickering lights in the room. But then, as I looked closer, something shifted in the glass. The reflection of the room seemed to warp and distort, and I could see something moving, something other than us. A shadow. I glanced at Harry, but he was still fixated on the mirror, his lips moving, though I couldn't hear the words. His face twisted with confusion and fear. His fingers twitched as if he was trying to reach out to the reflection, but he couldn't move. "Harry," I called, but my voice sounded distant, muffled by the pulsating hum in the air. Slowly, cautiously, I took a step closer to him, but something in the room seemed to push against me, as if warning me to stay away. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. The reflection in the mirror shifted again, this time more clearly. I saw a figure standing behind us, just out of sight in the real room, standing in the shadows. Its form was indistinct, as if it were made of the same mist that the mirror seemed to generate. I froze, my blood running cold. "Harry, look!" I whispered urgently. Harry's eyes slowly moved to mine, but they were glazed, as if he were in some kind of trance. He blinked, finally breaking his focus on the mirror. What is that?" he murmured, his voice shaky. His hand twitched as if he wanted to reach out again. But I couldn't look away from the reflection. The figure was now closer, moving toward us, its form becoming clearer with each passing second. A tall, gaunt figure, its face obscured by the shadows. It looked almost human, but not quite. Its limbs were too long, too thin, and its posture was unnaturally stiff. The reflection's eyes glowed, faintly at first, but then brighter, almost as if it were alive in the mirror. A low growl, barely audible, emanated from the depths of the room, and the figure in the mirror seemed to lean toward us, its eyes locking with mine. "Get away from it," Harry whispered, his voice shaking. I wanted to move. I wanted to pull him away, to run out of the room, but I felt like I was rooted to the spot. The figure in the mirror was pulling me in, its eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. "Louis! Louis!" Harry whispered again, his voice hoarse. "You need to snap out of it." His words broke through the haze in my mind. I took a deep breath, blinking rapidly. The growl in the air was growing louder, and I could feel the cold energy swirling around us. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just a reflection. It was something that was trying to break through to our world. I turned and grabbed Harry's arm, pulling him away from the mirror. The air seemed to thicken around us, and a cold, sharp wind blew through the room, making the lights flicker and buzz. "Run!" I shouted. Without thinking, we bolted toward the door, but before we could reach it, a figure appeared before us in the doorway. It was tall, impossibly tall, and hunched, its face still obscured in the shadows. A low growl rumbled through the room, and the figure stepped forward. Its eyes glowed, brighter now, and it snarled as if sensing our fear. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with the stench of decay. I shoved Harry behind me, my pulse pounding in my ears. We had no weapons, no way to fight whatever this was. My mind raced as I tried to think of something, anything, that could help us escape. But there was nothing. The figure in the doorway took another step, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. Then, without warning, it lunged toward us. The figure lunged at us with terrifying speed, its limbs jerking unnaturally as it crossed the room in an instant. My heart was pounding in my chest as I instinctively grabbed Harry's arm and yanked him to the side. We collided with the wooden floor, the sharp splintering sound echoing in the room. I had no time to process the impact before the creature was on us again, its glowing eyes piercing the darkened space. In a panic, I scrambled to my feet, pulling Harry up with me. The figure's breath was ragged, almost human, but the growl that emanated from its throat was pure animal. A low, rumbling growl that sent chills through my bones. "Get up!" I shouted at Harry, my voice strained with fear. We ran toward the window, the one escape route we could see. The creature was getting closer, its long fingers scraping against the walls as it moved. Every instinct told me we needed to get out, but the fear froze my thoughts. I reached the window first and shoved it open with all my strength. The old wood creaked under the pressure, and I felt the room shudder as the creature's growl grew louder behind us. "Louis, help me!" Harry shouted. I reached back to grab him, but the floorboards creaked loudly, as if the house itself was groaning under the weight of whatever was inside. The figure was closing in on us, its breath like cold wind on my neck. Finally, Harry squeezed through the window, and I followed quickly, barely getting through before the creature reached us. We tumbled out into the night air, the fresh breeze cutting through the terror that still gripped us. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure of which direction to go. The forest around the house was dark, silent except for the sound of our breathing. "Which way?" Harry gasped, looking around wildly. "Just go," I said, pulling him toward the path. "We need to get as far away as possible." We didn't look back. The forest seemed to close in around us as we ran, the dense trees pressing against us, but the fear pushing us forward. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I could still hear the sound of the creature's growl echoing in my mind, even though we were miles away from the house. We ran for what felt like hours, stumbling over rocks and uneven ground, until we finally found ourselves standing at the edge of the forest, breathless and terrified. The sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn, but the night still clung to the air, heavy with the fear of what we had just escaped. "We have to get back to the town," I said, still gasping for air. "We need to warn them. Whatever that thing was, it's real. It's not just a legend." Harry nodded, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock. That was no human. We stood there for a long moment, staring into the dark forest, unsure whether to turn back or keep moving forward. Finally, Harry broke the silence. "We need to go. We need to leave this place behind. Whatever that was, it's not something we can fight. It's something we can't understand." With a final glance toward the forest, we turned and started walking back toward the town. The sun was rising, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. We walked in silence, the sounds of the night fading behind us. But the image of the creature's glowing eyes remained burned in my mind. We walked in silence for a while, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves beneath our feet and the rustle of trees around us. As the town came into view, I could feel the tension in the air slowly begin to lift, but my mind was still racing. What do you think it was?" Harry's voice broke through the silence, low and uncertain. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the pounding in my chest. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "But it wasn't human. Not exactly." Harry nodded, his expression haunted. It wasn't solid, was it? It wasn't like a person. It was more like a shadow." "Yeah," I said, glancing over at him. "It was like a shadow trying to take form. The way it moved, so fast and unnatural, but it wasn't really physical, not like you'd expect from a person or an animal. It didn't seem to be able to hurt us directly. But it attacked us," Harry countered, stopping in his tracks for a moment. "It lunged at us. It wanted to hurt us. You saw how it moved. It was like it was trying to get us. But it didn't touch us. It just pushed us away." I stopped too, looking down at the ground. Yeah, I felt it. Like a pressure when it came close, but there were no actual marks. Nothing physical. No blood. No bruises. I shook my head in disbelief. It's like it was trying to force us into something, but it wasn't using its hands or teeth. It was like it was feeding off our fear. Harry stared into the distance, clearly still processing everything. So, it wasn't trying to kill us. It was trying to scare us, drive us out. But why? Why us? "I don't know," I muttered, rubbing my temples as if I could somehow force the answers to come. "But whatever it is, it's not a normal creature. It's something else. Something in between." We started walking again, both of us lost in thought. But the further we got from the house, the more I found myself questioning everything we had seen. How could something so dark, so unnatural, exist without leaving any real trace? It was almost as if it had no form, no real substance. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more of a presence than an actual being. A presence that existed to drive us out, to scare us into leaving. But why? What was it protecting? What was it guarding? "You don't think." Harry's voice was quieter now, as if testing the thought aloud. It was trying to stop us from uncovering something? Something hidden in that house? I stopped again, looking at him in surprise. You mean like the truth? The secret behind all those old legends? Yeah, Harry said, looking grim. What if it wasn't just some old stories? What if the legends were real and that thing was a part of it? A guardian or something? I thought about it for a moment. The chilling image of the shadow flickering in my mind. Maybe it was trying to protect the house or whatever's inside it. Something old, something powerful. It makes sense, Harry said, his voice steady now. All those stories about the old man, the werewolves, the strange things that people talked about but never really believed. What if it was all true? What if that thing was guarding something that shouldn't be found? I felt a shiver run down my spine. We need to get out of here, I said abruptly, my voice sharp. We need to get to the town and figure out what's really going on. Harry nodded. Yeah, I don't know if we'll ever find out what that thing was, but we need to stay away from that house. Whatever it is, it doesn't want us there. The town was getting closer now, and I could feel the weight of the night lifting. But the question still lingered in my mind. If we were so close to something that dangerous, what did it mean for the rest of the town? For the people who had lived there all this time? What secrets were buried in that old house? We walked faster, the sense of urgency growing stronger as the town finally came into view. But I knew that whatever we had encountered, we hadn't seen the last of it. The end of part 1.